Hello everybody, happy Wednesday. Welcome to my weekly Constitution study group. Today I have a very special guest. I'm very excited to come talk with me, bring some expertise, knowledge, and experience in this subject matter, which we all know I'm brand new to all of this, trying to learn this just as we all are. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Kathleen. Kathleen Dickinson, could you please introduce yourself? Let us know your experience with the Constitution and with civic engagement.
I'm delighted, and I'm delighted to be here today and be with you. I'm Kathleen Dickinson. I am the program director for the Nevada Center for Civic Engagement, and I am the state coordinator for We the People, Project Citizen, and programs created by the Center for Civic Education. They are out of California. We are in Nevada and we're statewide. And we do civics programming for kindergarten through 12th grade. But because all the parents are involved and other community members are involved with coaching the students and being involved with the students, then it reaches much wider audiences. And We the People basically is correlating the US Constitution with current events. And so the students learn about the history of the United States, its government, and also other countries and governments that led to the building of the US Constitution. And then all the other things that go on with Supreme Court cases, how they impact communities, how they impact our students and our teachers and our citizens. And it is very dynamic and engaging for the students to learn this way. We have hearings with We the People in 5th grade, 7th grade, and 12th grade, where community members come in, listen to a 4-minute presentation by the students, and then ask them follow-up questions for 6 to 10 minutes, and then give them feedback. So it improves communication skills, critical thinking skills, research skills, team building. It's really good to prevent bullying because students become best friends who would not naturally talk to each other or communicate with each other. And then Project Citizen teaches about public policy. So students are the ones who actually decide what the policy is that they're going to work on. So it could be their community at school on how they get from one class to another. It could be getting their gates locked up so that they feel safe. It can be painting murals on the walls on the outside of the schools, creating community gardens, creating language classes for people in the community, getting crosswalks, getting traffic lights. It can be anything like that. And then we also have Law Day, which is a different theme each year by the American Bar Association. Mm-hmm. And attorneys come into the classrooms to talk about whatever the theme is. So one year it was the anniversary of the Miranda warning. Mm-hmm. One year it was the anniversary of the Magna Carta. It's been involving with I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King. So lots of different themes like that too.
Great. I actually remember the We the People program when I was in high school. It was actually a big deal. The team, or the teacher, I should say, at my school was really into it, and he used to take the team. And I think a couple of years that I was there, they had actually won first place. And I unfortunately didn't get involved in that program. I was really dedicated into my sports and was focused on some other projects, and so passed that up. And I really kind of regret that now because I did have several friends that did that program. And you're right, yeah, they did form lots of friendships, and I think they were really a lot more equipped handling some of the things in like university that we don't really see as skills taught in high school, public speaking and just debate and how to process ideas even if they're not your own ideas. Yeah, I was kind of envious that I didn't do that program. So Mike Litt, who introduced us, he had told me you were involved in We the People. I was like, oh, I got to talk with her and hopefully she'll want to come on here and talk with me in this context, because I kind of feel like I'm making up for lost time and not being involved in that kind of, not involved, but engaged, right? Not being
Mhm.
engaged with that kind of curriculum, which, at that age, and I've talked about this over and over again during this series, that when you are in high school, you may be intelligent, you may be able to read the words and
Mhm.
speak the words, but really connecting with those concepts at that age with that lack of experience of being out in the world, interacting with other human beings within society, uh, it wasn't relevant to me, and so it didn't stick. So I feel like I'm like making up for all that lost time now. Um, what's going on this year with that program, with the distance learning going on? What kind of changes have you guys adapted to?
Actually, it's been very busy. In a normal year, the national competition would have taken place in the Washington, D.C. area, and two of our high schools would have gone to that in person. And then they would have been able to have gone to all the different buildings that DC has to offer, and they would have had their hearings in person.
Mm-hmm.
But because of COVID-19, we had the hearings virtually.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were able to have the judges come in virtually, and the schools actually participated virtually, and they did very well. Our Reno High School came in sixth nationwide, and our
Wow.
Incline High School came in 11th nationwide.
Wow,
And
congratulations.
then in June and July, we offered trainings for teachers. So we had 22 teachers in June and 24 teachers in July. Normally that would have been in person also, but this year we were able to do it virtually. So we were able to have a virtual field trip of the Mob Museum,
Cool.
which went very, very well. We had scholars who spoke on the 1918 pandemic, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, the history of our government, and women's suffrage, since this is the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage.
Mm-hmm.
So those teachers now are equipped to go into their classrooms virtually and do distance teaching on all of these subjects and more. We are providing ebooks and regular paper textbooks for the teachers to use in their classrooms. And activelylearn.com has the We the People textbooks for all the grade levels, and they are under Achieve 3000. Clark County School District has purchased the license for Achieve 3000, so all the teachers have that access. So that's
Wow.
really great. And
That's
then the rest of
cool.
the state, we're providing ebooks and textbooks.
So, yeah, a lot of people have been skeptical about how effective distance learning is, but I think if done well and done in an engaging way, it could actually be keep you even busier. And scaling the accessibility, right? So, like when Mike Litt first told me, and by the way, I met Mike Litt through the Elizabeth Warren campaign, which was actually like my first step into my modern manifestation of civic engagement, now using my platform, my business's platform, to engage the community. When he was working on Elizabeth Warren's campaign during the primaries, he wanted to host an event, and so he hosted it here in my tea room. We had a very successful, more of a community roundtable. I'm really trying to keep things as nonpartisan as possible, but still trying to keep the conversation going. So anyway, Mike had emailed me just to check in, see how I'm doing, and he told me about you, and I said, wow, that's amazing. We could have like two outcomes of engaging students that are usually keeping this education within their classroom. We can utilize tools like streaming, like what we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
to scale that education and engagement, not only to like their parents and to their immediate families, but also to the community. No one better to be teaching this stuff than children, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
like children, young adults. I kind of meaning that people that have yet to be indoctrinated in one ethos or another, which a lot of times gets in the way, of having a productive learning experience. Because, yeah, with the Constitution, there's definitely a lot of interpretation. And
and there's nothing like listening to 10-year-olds argue whether we should have a death penalty or not, or argue whether anyone should ever lose their right to vote. And they do it very civilly, very politely with each other, and put forth their arguments and put forth their opinions. And they are it's the best age group to work with. Because middle schoolers have a lot going on with their growth spurts and all kinds of social interactions. And then high schoolers often have jobs and boyfriends, girlfriends, proms, what college are they going to, what military service are they going to, those kinds of things. Yeah. So 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds are just amazing.
Yeah, and I'd much rather watch 10-year-olds trying to decipher these very deep ideas and conflicts in their own ways. What's that primetime TV show that was really popular? Kids Say the Darndest Things. Like take some form of entertainment like that, but infuse education, infuse civic engagement into it. I'm really enthusiastic about trying to support a platform for that. I actually have a friend that's running for president, and he's under the Independent Party. He's a decentralist, so I guess in those terms you'd call it like an anti-federalist. He's a leader in the blockchain community, and actually my company is a leader in the blockchain community as well. We're actually one of the first companies in the world to work with cryptocurrency, all for a better good. We're all just trying to find more efficiencies and more distribution of power back to the marginalized. In our case, it's farmers. We work with farmers in rural parts of the world that usually are most definitely marginalized, forgotten about, and left out of the value exchange. And so anyway, my friend that's running for president, by the way, his name is Brock Pierce, if you want to research his platform. He's actually building an open source platform. So, and he's running not as himself, but as a movement, more like it. It's interesting. It's I don't.
Pierce, Pearce or Pierce?
The second one. Yeah.
The second one.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Brock Pierce. Yeah, he used to be a child movie star, and then he turned an entrepreneur, and then he got involved in cryptocurrency, which is definitely a global politics, world. And then he actually did quite a bit of work in Puerto Rico. He built, some infrastructures after the hurricane there, and now he's running for president. But anyway, I was suggesting to him on his platform that he should have like these. Not only is it a platform where you go listen to what this potential politician is wanting to offer in policy, but also education platform too, because that seems to be a big gap, in the voting community. Is the fact that we're having arguments about whether or not we need to wear a mask or not it shows a lot about our education level around the Constitution and around what the government is meant to serve us for. And so he's providing a lot of that education. And I was telling him, yeah, you should have, virtual portals where people can just go down a rabbit hole learning about the Constitution, learning about our country's history, right? I mean, even the history of political parties is fascinating. And when you study that, it kind of removes those binds that we've been feeling in politics, and actually I feel personally has inhibited people from engaging civically or voting. They just feel like it's a broken system, which means there's always room to fix it. That broken system has been fixed several times over since the Constitution's been written, so there's no reason why we can't be questioning things now. So yeah, maybe in the future we'll be able to give a platform, and I would love 10-year-olds to be at the helm of that. I think that would be incredible.
Well, we do have hearings scheduled. So December 12th, we have our district invitational, which is going to be statewide. And then March 13th, we will have it for elementary, middle, and high school levels. They will showcase their hearings. And so we also have a PLC. So it's nvcce.org is our website. And a lot of the information in the upcoming lecture series will be posted on there.
That was
And
NLVC?
N is in Nevada, V is in Victor,
Mm-hmm.
C is in center,
Mm-hmm.
C is in civic,
Yeah.
E is in engagement,
Okay.
.org.
Okay. I just put that link up on the comments if anybody is interested in looking into that. Yeah, that's great. So what about adults?
The lecture series is open to all adults.
Oh, great.
And we're kicking it off September 17th with Constitution Day.
Awesome.
And we're partnering with UNLV for a panel discussion that evening at 6 p.m. But we're also going to have a presentation at 3:30 that day with former Oregon Justice Sue Leeson, who's going to talk about the Federalist, Anti-Federalist, and the 1918 pandemic and how it corresponds to today's pandemic. And she's a great speaker, so it's going to be a wonderful event.
Wow.
And then there's also other lecture series that are available through the Center for Civic Education, who I mentioned earlier, who began We the People and Project Citizen back in 1987.
That's the Nevada Center for Civic Engagement, or is that like a larger national organization?
The national organization is the Center for Civic
Okay.
Education.
Okay. Center for
And the
Civic.
Nevada organization is Nevada Center for Civic Engagement.
All right. Now I got all the acronyms right. I got them all right now. Great. And so then those lectures, are those like going to be through Zoom rooms, or are those going to be like streamed?
Yes.
Or through?
They will be through Zoom rooms.
Okay.
So it will all be virtual. Everybody's allowed to attend. And I'll send you the links
Okay.
as we get them so that you can put the word out if you'd like to.
Great. Yeah, no, I definitely will. And would love to try to help amplify that. Maybe offline I can talk to you about ways that I could help with that. Getting that content to a wider audience than just in the Zoom meeting itself. There's a lot of potential there. But yeah, that speech sounds really amazing. Those are all like topics that have kind of been repeated over and over again. One topic that I'm surprised hasn't been, focused more is looking back at the 1918 pandemic and seeing the parallels to now. I actually found this really incredible collection of documents. It's influential archives, or influenzaarchives.org, I believe. I'll put the link up. But it's a collection of academically written, compiled stories of 50 different cities in the U.S. of the response to the pandemic, and it even has the data about like how long closures lasted, what were the mask debates, and then what were the outcomes of each city. And I feel like if we had read those documents from day one, we would be so much more prepared. But it's so interesting how much of a disconnect there is between what's happening now and what we know has happened in the past.
That is true, because the Ebola crisis wasn't that long ago. The SARS crisis was not that long ago. And even the polio crisis of the 1930s, 1940s, President Roosevelt wound up contracting it, which was unusual at the time as an adult. But that basically was a virus that needed a vaccine to prevent it. And it basically was a pandemic, but it's not often referred to as a pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And it's really interesting, though, how the Constitution gets brought up as a weapon on both sides of defending their arguments. And so, yeah, maybe we can go into a little bit of that. Like, something that's been a hot topic, and usually whenever I talk with someone else, I like to ask their opinion and their experiences with it. But the whole, like, how do we defend the argument of the constitutionality of uh, mandates to wear masks? Is that something that the
Well,
students would?
the common good is something that is always taught in all civics classes. And so I think the masks are a good example of what benefits the common good, because we're preventing the sharing of the virus with anybody that we come into contact with. Because even though there's so much more we need to know about COVID-19 that we don't know, that they're still learning about, initially they did not have good information on who was most vulnerable to contracting it. And I'm not sure that they still do, because apparently people who have survived it can be reinfected, so that antibodies aren't necessarily working against it. But to basically go to your question, I think common good covers all aspects of it. That by wearing a mask, you don't necessarily know if you have it or not, if you don't show symptoms, but you're protecting not only yourself, but you're protecting others from contracting it.
Yeah. Yeah. But what about our right? What about our civil rights? To do what we want. What part of the
Your
Constitution?
civil right to infect somebody else, to harm somebody else.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I have family even that and they are in like the high risk category, and their perspective on it is that they have a right to die. They, like they weigh their priorities in life, and being isolated is.
I think it's similar to whether we wear seatbelts or not,
Yes.
whether we wear motorcycle helmets or not, or bicycle helmets or not. So society has to pay for the hospital bills of those who refuse to wear helmets who are in an accident, or refuse to wear seatbelts and are in an accident. So if you can afford and you want to be that uncomfortable, because apparently COVID-19 is not comfortable. It hurts your joints, your lungs, causes coughing, tiredness, exhaustion. It's a painful virus to contract. And it's also an expensive one if you have to spend several weeks in the hospital.
Yeah.
So if you want to pay those prices and suffer those consequences, then yes, it is your right to do so.
Okay. But then not your right to infect someone else. And so that's where I think there's kind of a line drawn in this argument, right? Because it involves other people.
Right.
But yeah, it's so interesting to so like the origins of doing this whole program that I'm doing right now originally came from an article that I read about 6 months ago. Well, it's probably even longer now. Like 6 months is like a vacuum gone away. Maybe it's like 8 months ago I read this article. Active duty military member was making commentary about the state of military, and his observation that him and his peers had all taken an oath to protect this thing that they had never studied a day or a second of, or engaged with a second of their service. And I thought that's kind of interesting, right? Because even a politician or military members, they all take this oath to protect the Constitution. And if you're not engaged with it, like, what is your purpose? Like, what is your values? And so I wanted to create this kind of like a Bible study group, but for Constitution and engage active duty military. And with COVID, can't really do that right now. And so, but then whenever I started hearing everybody making these arguments about my constitutional right this, my constitutional right that, I decided just to put it up on the internet for everybody. And the arguments are still there, and there's still things that I'm kind of unclear about. The thing that like I'm unclear about, maybe you can give me some idea or some inspiration of maybe a different perspective to look at this, is in regards to militia and you know, trying to understand the historical context of when the Constitution was written and what the Second Amendment meant versus what it means now, right? And what, like, yeah, like what are some of the ways that I can look at it to better understand?
When we began as a country, we began with a war, basically. And so at that time, we were a new country. We were 13 colonies. So those 13 colonies were not necessarily united in the beginning. They had to work towards uniting. And so we did not have an army or a navy or an air force or any of those services, Marines. And so an organized militia became communities that organized in a way to fight the British for our freedom from Britain. But then after a fashion, after we started to develop our Bill of Rights, our Constitution, and that was put into the Second Amendment as an amendment, because at that point we still did not necessarily have an army. I mean, George Washington was basically the leader of the first army that we had in the United States. I do not think our framers had any idea that there were going to be AK-47s or assault rifles or weaponry like that would be created and available to anybody that was not going to be part of an organized militia. And granted, at that time, weaponry was necessary to protect oneself from wild animals or from any endangerment. But again, I still don't think they had it in mind that they would have AK-47s. And so I think it probably needs to be revisited. It's not necessarily the best written amendment out of the 27 amendments that we have. So it probably would not hurt for somebody to take the lead to rewrite it, to make it a more practical, logical amendment.
What would that process look like?
Well, it's sort of like the Equal Rights Amendment has only just been ratified. And it took decades to ratify a couple of other amendments that we have. So the amendment process is not necessarily a fast process. So someone has to take the lead in creating the amendment, and then it has to be ratified by 38 states. And so convincing all the 38 states to go ahead and ratify. Same thing with the right to vote for women's suffrage. That took many decades to happen and to actually implement. So the amendment process is not a quick one. And the reason they claim that that is the case is because it needs time to be discussed on all sides of the issue. Probably one of the faster, a couple of the fastest, like the 18th Amendment was prohibition. That probably happened too fast, because then the 21st Amendment was required in order to undo the 18th Amendment. And then the 26th Amendment was to lower the voting age to 18. And that seems like it was relatively quick because it came about during the Vietnam War. But again, these are things that do take time.
Yeah. I had another question. When I first started doing this and I was like reading what the amendment process was like, so you have the process that you mentioned, but then it's also written that there could be a constitutional convention. And I'm curious about that. Like, what would that look like? And is that possible? Like, could we have like a complete rehaul of our, Constitution and our government if everybody was able to come together?
Well, I think you would probably have all of the Congress people and all the senators be a part of such a convention. And if you've watched C-SPAN at all, or CNN when there's been discussions or hearings on Capitol Hill, you have an idea of what that would look like. It wouldn't be as simple as the Philadelphia Convention that took place in the 1700s, when you were only dealing with 13 colonies. So it would be possible to answer your question on whether it was possible. Yes. Would it be an amazing thing to watch and listen to? Yes. And they would have to really figure out a really strong agenda and a really strong set of rules on how they were going to have the discussions and how they were going to keep track of the votes and any piece of it that would be voted on.
Well, I mean, the thing that's kind of cool to think about is like I'm imagining like a virtual forum where everything is
Mm-hmm.
digital, and so then all the counting of votes and the collection of data would just be plugged in and built in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe like with a leader like my friend Brock, if he was to ever get into a position of leadership, that would probably be something that he as a leader would make happen. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
let's just pull out the drawing board. Let's see what we're already working with, see where the challenges are, and work through this. I'm a very optimistic person. So that was like my first idea that came through when I was reading it. And I told my friend who is I think she has like a advanced degree in international politics, and I told her about it, and she says, "No, Lisa, that would be an absolute shit show. It wouldn't happen. It couldn't happen. They wouldn't let that happen." Like,
It could happen, but it would be quite an undertaking.
yeah. So,
You have to have Robert's Rules of Law or Robert's Rules of Order, and
mhm.
somebody who really understood that well.
What is
And
that?
Robert's Rules of Order, you can Google it,
Okay.
and it's basically how to run a meeting um, without too much chaos.
Oh, okay. Cool. I need to
And
know
so
this.
there are people who are practitioners and who are called parliamentarians. And so when you're having any kind of a meeting where you know that you're going to have conclusions drawn, you want a parliamentarian in that meeting because they will know how the votes need to happen.
Yeah. Has anybody in the past ever proposed a Second Amendment modification in the past?
Well, it's aspects of it has probably been brought forth to the Supreme Court, but I don't know specifically
Okay.
when or how that has happened. So I'm not really sure if it
Yeah.
has been or not.
Well, because yeah, it just seems that like gun law is a very hot button, and
It
it
is.
yeah, and it feels like any laws or any policies would just be add-ons, and I feel like if we went to the source of the arguments and modified that, we may find some better solutions there.
I think that there have been solutions proposed that seem relatively logical. That you don't want somebody who's convicted of domestic violence having a gun. You don't want someone who has been involved in violent crimes having a gun. And then there's the question of mental illness, which may be more of a controversial subject because who's to decide what mental illness is and what does that mean exactly? But as far as the first two items, I don't know that they need to be that controversial. Would you really want to eat the meat of an animal that you riddled with an AK-47 or with any kind of assault weapon? Because it would be kind of hard to take all the shrapnel and everything else out of that meat.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's I think, a logic and maybe a common sense that can be involved in the process of strengthening or changing some of the aspects of gun laws.
Yeah.
And I think the main problem has been that the data banks have not been kept up to date. And so there's been situations where somebody bought a weapon and then used it 3 days later in a mass shooting, but they were not given that waiting period, and it was not determined that they ought not to have been sold the gun. So there's that piece of it that I think probably if all the laws that are actually in place were actually implemented, it would be fine.
Yeah, yeah. Huh. Another interesting solution that blockchain could provide, hosting these databases, these like transparent, real-time, verifiable databases of something really important about who should have the right to purchase a firearm or not. Another question I have about militias specifically, maybe not so much about gun laws, because I feel like that's where the argument always goes, is to gun laws immediately. And I'm like, well, what about militia? Like, the term still exists. There are organized militia that are still a very big part of our country. And then there's this whole category of